Well, of course, yesterday history was made when we saw Richard Branson win the race to space as the Virgin Galactic test flight successfully made it into orbit. But let's now turn our attention to the accumulation of wealth that allowed Branson to do this in the first place. For more, we're joined by Matt Grudnoff, senior economist at the Australia Institute. Hello, mate. Nice to meet you. How are you today?
Good morning.
So firstly, what was your take on the Virgin Galactic flight itself?
Well, I think it's a bit weird that we've got billionaires, Elon Musk, Bezos, and Branson all racing themselves to space. I mean, this is an incredibly expensive thing, and it just highlights when you're a billionaire, how much money you've got and where you can throw it. I mean, in economics, we kind of think if markets are working well, that billionaires shouldn't exist. A billionaire can only exist when markets fail, when they're able to rip their customers off, effectively take a larger slice of the pie. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing these people with enormous amounts of money who are sort of throwing it into, a competition to see who can get into space first.
So tell us more by what you mean by the market failure and the fact that they can be billionaires and maybe even trillionaires. I don't know if we might have a trillionaire these days, it's hard to remember, but tell us more, take us into why and how the market fails. And then do you also think this is a failure where an individual can take this sort of move and head into space as well?
Yeah, look, what I mean by market failure is if the market was competitive and there were sort of these super profits that are required in order for you to become a billionaire, then new competitors would move into the market and they would undercut the prices. The prices would go down, so consumers would effectively get that slice of the pie. Instead, because the markets are failing, because they're not competitive, then new entrants can't enter into the market, or for other reasons, basically they're stopped from that. And so instead of this surplus going to consumers in the form of lower prices, in form of better quality product, they're actually going to individuals. And sometimes people don't realize how much $1 billion is. They kind of think, thousands, millions, billions is just the next one along. But to give you an example, 1 million seconds is 11 and a half days. So if you were alive when you're 11 and a half days old, you've been alive for a million seconds. 1 billion seconds is 31 and a half years. So you won't reach 1 billion seconds until you're 31 and a half years old. There's a massive difference between million and billion. And then if you go on to trillion, it's so much more again. So, and we don't have any trillionaires. I think the richest people in the world are just over 100 billion. But it's a massive amount of wealth. And what it represents effectively is a market failure. And the more billionaires we have in the world, it means that markets are working less effective. And as an economist, we normally love markets, but not these kind of markets that produce billionaires.
So do you think, just finishing up on this point, and I love the way that you just outlined that, I've never heard anyone put it into seconds, but it really makes you think, doesn't it? So in terms of how far we've gone and this broken system in some ways, where there are these dominant players, we know who they are, we've just touched on them. Have we gone too far? Are they too dominant now for us to reevaluate and to try and balance things out a little bit more, do you think?
I don't think that we've ever gone too far. I think it's a democratic question about what the rules are. So governments around the world create the rules. They create the rules that the markets have to abide by. But absolutely, we see all kinds of problems with huge tech companies and the monopolies that are existing at the moment. And there's a lot of call to break them up and introduce new rules so that they aren't so dominant. And it's that dominance, that market power that they have, which allows them to create all this wealth and concentrate it in one location. Okay, and in economics, we think that the consumer is king. They're the ones that we want to help the most. And these kind of markets are not helping consumers as much as they could. And we totally, as economists, we think that you're better off having lots of players in competitive markets rather than single sort of firms dominating. And that can only create economic problems.
Let's turn our attention to the latest when it comes to COVID-19. Of course, we're being hit here in Australia, the Sydney lockdown. In terms of these short and sharp lockdowns, are these the most effective tool for both preventing the spread and protecting the economy? When we look at the economical side of things as well, do you think this is the best way to do it?
Yeah, look, we're often told there's this trade-off between a health response and an economic response. But I think what we're actually seeing is that an effective health response is the best economic response. That is, short, sharp lockdowns that prevent community transmission are actually better for the economy than just leaving the economy open and having community transmission. If we look around the world, Australia, for example, has been criticised for having these short, fast lockdowns when we've only had a little bit of community transmission. Excuse me. But if we look around the world, Australia is doing the best of all the developed countries as far as economic growth goes. They're near the top as far as employment goes. And I think that when we look back, when economists pick over the history of this, when we've moved on past the pandemic, I think what we're actually going to find is that short, sharp lockdowns that control community transmission are the best economic response. Why? Because the economy is a lot about psychology as well as mechanics. Things like how people feel, whether they feel happy or whether they feel like they're comfortable and content, they're actually really important parts to decide whether people are going to go out and spend or whether they're going to stay at home and not spend. And when we know that 60% of GDP is made up of consumer spending, and if you have community transmission, if COVID's rampant within a society, even if the economy doesn't lock down, people are going to be nervous to go out and spend and the economy is going to suffer. Whereas at the moment in Australia, what we're seeing is between these short lockdowns, we've basically got no community transmission and people can basically go about almost as if there was no COVID, and that's what's really helping our economy.
Yeah, so there's no real perfect solution as you touch on. Sometimes people say it needs to happen this way, but both sides really have arguments. Just a brief one to finish. As you were talking there, I'm thinking about the debt going forward for Australia at the moment, and obviously some businesses have shut down throughout this time. How concerned are you from the economy standpoint that the debt moves forward, someone has to pay for it in the end?
Yeah, look, I think that the alternative to having not having a debt is to have an economy that collapsed. And that's far worse than any debt that we're going to rack up, stopping that economic collapse. Interest rates, the government recently could borrow for 30 years at a fixed 30 years rate for about 1%. I mean, the inflation rate over the next 30 years is probably going to average about 2.5%. So, I mean, the debt is not really going to be a problem. It's certainly something that as the economy grows, it will absorb. But the alternative, when you think about debt and whether or not it's good, you have to think of, well, what did the debt buy? And what the debt bought us was not going into a deep, dark recession, not having a prolonged period of really high unemployment. And that's far better for the economy. It's far better for the future generations than not having that debt.
Matt, great to chat. Really appreciate your time and absolutely love the conversation today. So hopefully we continue doing this here on Ticker News. Have a great rest of your day until next time.
Thank you very much.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.